Welcome to the test set. Here we talk with some of the brightest thinkers and tinkerers in statistical analysis, scientific computing, and machine learning, digging into what makes them tick, plus the insights, experiments, and OMG moments that shape the field. On this episode, we jam with Alenka Frim, mathematician turned yogi, turned all-star Apache Arrow committer, who notes that open source and yoga's revolved side angle pose have more in common than you'd think. Hey everybody, welcome to the test set. We're joined today by Alenka Frim, who's a data engineer and software developer and a committer to Apache Arrow and on the project management committee, or PMC, and an Iyengar yoga teacher. And I'm joined by my two co-hosts, Hadley Wickham, who's chief scientist at Posit, and Wes McKinney, who's principal architect at Posit. And we're so excited to talk today. I feel like maybe one theme in hearing and in reading a little bit about you, Alenka, is it seems like the theme of sort of how do open source systems stay healthy, and sometimes they're big systems like Arrow, which sort of undergird a lot of data work and tools that people use. So thanks so much for coming on the test set. Yeah, I thought maybe we could start today with just a little icebreaker, which might be maybe we could just go around, and I'd be curious to hear from people what do you think are like what's assigned to each of you of a healthy open source community, would you say?
I'm happy to go first. I'm very interested in Alenka's take, especially after being involved in. I mean, I'm also been very involved in Arrow since the beginning, but I've been less involved actively in the last 5 years, and so I think Alenka's understanding and knowledge of the Arrow community is actually really interesting for this conversation, because I have a lot of experience, like Arrow the first five years, Alenka Arrow the last 5 years, and so together we can really speak accurately to like what a whole 10 years of the Arrow project has looked like. But for me, like, I think the big signs are whether the community is adding people, like people are coming and staying, and also are members of the community comfortable raising concerns about what's not working and having constructive dialogue about how to fix it without blaming or pointing fingers.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I think what I see on Arrow, which I feel it shows of a healthy community, is the way we interact on GitHub, which is the main point of interaction, I would say. Not only with PRs, but there's discussions, there is issues, together with the mailing lists. Mailing list, one is for developers, one is for users. I feel there's a lot of motion, a lot of people raising questions, giving PRs, even reviews from a broader community, not just people and I think that's really shows, and the communication is really so respectful. I'm not sure about open source in general, but my experience with Arrow is really, really positive in that sense. So I think that shows of health. I'm not sure how much Apache here influences. I think it has a strong, like it stands on a strong foundation because it's under the Apache umbrella, I would say, because there's already a structure that people know and they follow it. How to communicate, what's expected, what's not. So I think that's really helpful.
The thing that like first came to my mind, like kind of building on what Wiz says, but the first thing that came to my mind was like turnover, not just like adding new people, but I think it's also really healthy to have like people leave the community, because that's like the sign that you've built something that's like more than just like one or two people. And I do think like one of the things we don't kind of talk about enough in general is like kind of death as the part of the life cycle, or like not death as in like the ending of things, but like people moving on to new things, changing roles, putting down things that they've had that they've looked after over a long time. I think that's like super, super important.
Yeah, it's so interesting that aspect of people leaving. And I know, Wes, you mentioned like you were with Arrow for like you have some perspective on the first 5 years, and Alenka came in for the last 5 years. maybe to kick things off, Alenka, I'd be really curious to hear maybe a little bit about like what is Arrow and how did you get involved with it?
Well, Arrow in the core, the way I see it, the way I understand it now, is a format that specifies an optimal way of saving data in memory so it can be analyzed um, the best, like the optimal way of analyzing, versus having row by row as it's in conventional databases. But then this is just kind of an idea. I mean, the format, but then you have to build on it so it's useful. And then there's so much languages connected to it, so it's not just a format. It's like a specification for languages, for applications. I mean, it's so broad. And then every implementation, every language has kind of a structure, so you can actually use data in memory or data on disk, with this kind of format. So it's a really broad thing. I hope I kind of helped understand this, because it's not something people use. It's something that, it's already there, used by applications. So it's they're faster and more optimal. But in the essence, is just making things easier for a computer to, calculate and analyze, making it faster and more efficient.
It sounds like you're saying like a lot of people, even if they don't realize it, are probably using Arrow when they're doing like data analysis or maybe like querying a database or loading a file of data.
I mean, the project has quietly crept into all corners of the data world. I actually just read a blog post on a data engineering Substack titled "Apache Arrow is Eating the World," basically channeling, Mark Andreessen's famous "Software is Eating the World," and it's kind of true. Like I think if you look at the data ecosystem, increasingly, like you look at the Venn diagram and you look at projects that support or use Arrow in some fashion, the ones that don't, and like the bubble that supports Arrow or uses it in some fashion has continued to grow, and the other bubble has shrunk as time has gone on. And so, which has been, I think very interesting to watch, but also I think it speaks to the credibility that the community has built. And part of the credibility of an open source project like Arrow, that you want everybody, all these hundreds of projects in open source, in commercial projects, to depend on, is that they have to believe in the Arrow community to keep being healthy, to keep delivering good software, because it has become this piece of critical infrastructure. And I think people like Alenka have been responsible for building and developing the community to create that credibility that has led to the project's success. I admit that I've forgotten the details of how we came to be connected and how you got involved in the project at the beginning, but I think all that is very interesting to me, because you started out as a contributor and have grown into a leading member of the community. And I think that's a really interesting arc in your kind of your growth as a open source community leader.
Can you paint the picture for us? Like what were you up to when you started contributing to Arrow?
Well, the interesting thing is that I wasn't up to anything. At that time, I was solely teaching yoga for 5 years and doing nothing with computers. So yeah, before I was working in a central bank as on a statistical department, just helping with anything they needed. And I graduated in I'm a mathematician. So when pandemic hit, I had less classes. They were mostly online. I had a bit more time, and I realized I missed something. So I started doing some research, what could be a nice way for me to get back into. I didn't know even what space, like, is it data science, data analytics, data engineering? I had no idea. But I wanted to try to see if, it still intrigues me. So when I started contributing to Arrow, I had no idea that in the meantime, dplyr happened, because I was using R in central bank. Pandas was big, but I haven't really used it before. So I was really kind of new. I had a friend that was working on Arrow at that time, so I was kind of brainstorming. We were brainstorming what could I try, and open source sounded a great place because I wasn't looking for a job. I was looking for an opportunity to try out and to learn and to have fun. So I'm not sure why I picked Arrow. We talked about different things. I think I like hard problems. So I was really interested in if I can, figure things out. The bad thing that I mean, the bad thing, um, the thing I struggled with a bit was that I wasn't a user. So I wasn't using Arrow in any sense. So it's kind of harder to understand it then, because it would be much easier. But at the same time, I think the perspective I got from just trying to contribute was a different one, and it's also it has other positive things. So yeah, when I started, I did some contributions to R because that was the language that I was most comfortable with. Um, and I was just lucky that right after my fourth or fifth contribution, we had a nice communication, nice collaboration with the R maintainers. There was a position open because there were grants. I think Ursa Labs got a grant from CZI. So it was just, I think I was just at the right place at the right time, really.
And just to give a little context to people who might not know about like what an R contribution to Arrow is, like what is a R contribution to Arrow?
It can be different things. What I did was something that I thought would be the easiest, which is a binding. What that means is that our package, our Arrow package, is connected to the C++ implementation. So you have a C++ code base that defines the format, the zero copying. It defines how to read Parquet files, how to save them, all of that in C++, and then you don't have to do all of this magic again in R. You just kind of connect it, right? So there's different layers, and you have to just figure out what are the pieces of a puzzle that you need. So my strategy was just look at PRs that were done before on a similar thing, and just try to figure out what's needed.
You kind of mentioned earlier you weren't a user of Arrow, which they kind of made me wonder, like, who do you think is a user of Arrow? Like, I think of like Arrow as mostly this kind of like invisible technology, right? Like it succeeds because things just work, and you don't, like, ideally I think you don't know that Arrow is being involved. It's just like, oh, I can use my data from wherever I'm working and wherever it lives. Like, who do you think of as the users
Well,
of Arrow?
it also depends on the implementation, I think, but mostly for most of the Arrow implementations, the users are actually developers that build on. For example, Query Engine uses this format, and you just kind of build things on. Then you have pandas, for example, trying to use PyArrow, so Arrow part of the kernels to do some of the things faster, better. So yeah, it's not an end user, I would say. Maybe an R package, that's a bit more usual to have an end user using it. But mostly, I mean, even in PyArrow, it's really interesting that a lot of PRs, a lot of pull requests, a lot of contributions are done by developers that have so much knowledge, and they already know exactly what they need. They just, make a PR, and you're like, okay, I need a week to understand it. So yeah, these are experienced developers of applications that that it doesn't necessarily, the application will be for the end user, but it can be. Sometimes it's also an application for an application, if that makes sense. So yeah, I do remember one of the first meetings I had with Arrow project. I still remember what they said, and they were saying that we are doing a good job if nobody knows about Arrow, right? So it totally makes sense, but I still feel that people should know about Arrow. If not for general, knowledge, for support, because if you don't know about Arrow, then how will people get support for maintenance and working on that?
I mean, I the way I've looked at it is I've told end users they don't need to know necessarily details of how to use Arrow or how to implement it, but rather when they're evaluating their other technology choices, that's something they should ask as part of their due diligence checklist is, does this system support Arrow, or if it doesn't, is Arrow support on the roadmap? Because essentially that shows that a project is looking at the landscape of the open source ecosystem through like a progressive lens of like, this is something that it's not something that constrains systems necessarily, but it makes them more interoperable and more efficient. And so if there's a downstream project that doesn't see that kind of interoperability or that kind of performance improvement that Arrow provides, that is, for me, that's like a bit of a strike against the project. And that's not necessarily like fully disqualifying, but definitely like, it would make me second guess like a choice of a critical piece of data technology.
It is an interesting challenge though, like when an open source product like primarily exists to kind of remove pain, like people, like as soon as it kind of like percolate, like people kind of forget, oh, this was actually really annoying and frustrating to do before, and that just becomes normalized so quickly. And then like, how do you tell that story? Like, okay, you should support this project because it's actually making your life much like people don't really appreciate that story, right? That's like, oh, when I used to walk to school, it was, it snowed every day and I had to walk uphill both ways. It's an interesting challenge.
I'm not sure if necessarily developers or users need to know that or need to feel that. I think it's more on the managers and more on the leaders of this applications or companies. I think it's more on them to know the how serious this is.
Yeah, and I guess maybe to make it concrete too for folks, there's that projects like Polars uses Arrow, and I think Pandas has Arrow support, and I think DuckDB as well is built on or largely.
As far as I understand,
Arrow?
they are influenced, so they use the same format structure, but it's not something they don't depend on Arrow per se. No.
Yeah, DuckDB's internal data representation that it uses for all of its query processing is very Arrow-like. And they actually early on, we started working with Hannes and Mark prior to even the existence of DuckDB Labs and the DuckDB Foundation to essentially figure out how to better align DuckDB with the Arrow ecosystem. And they did make changes in DuckDB to make the interface between Arrow and DuckDB work better, but without doing it in such a way that it didn't sacrifice performance, in just only using DuckDB. I think they had the requirement. They're like, well, we don't want to make DuckDB slower in order to reduce the impedance mismatch with Arrow. And so they were able to find a path where, the bridge, you can think of it as like a bridge between Arrow and DuckDB. It's not a totally free bridge, but it's like they want the toll on the bridge to be as low as possible. And so the toll is pretty, you can, use DuckDB as an engine to process streams of Arrow data, and it's a very one of the most effective ways to build an application nowadays.
Maybe it's easier for folks to understand these differences in if you think of Arrow specification, which is same or shared between Polars, DuckDB, and Arrow projects. So the idea is the same of how you store data. And then just implementations themselves, Arrow provides an implementation you can use, or DuckDB has its own, or Polars has its own. It's a Rust implementation, but because it's all the same spec, it's kind of some people just say it's built on Arrow, but it's just compatible.
How do you think about that? Like, it's always difficult to, like, specifications are hard to like narrow, like get every single, like everyone agreeing on all these things that you don't like think about when you're writing it. Like how is the kind of specification and the implementations of Arrow like co-evolved over time?
I think that's a good question for Wes. I can say from how I'm observing it is you need to have a really good idea of how to make it in a way that people will be using it. So, so it's kind of user friendly in a way. So they're like, okay, yes, and we can use that. It makes sense. And then also, I think what I see when working with Arrow, especially in PyArrow, because then separately Python has a lot of specifications for interchange. You have DLPAC, you have data interchange. I mean, there's a lot of them. So what's the difference? I think it's just when there's a need, something arises. And then with Arrow, I think the way community feels is that we're building something solid. And then if people need something different, that's fine. But kind of the main thing is solid and we're going to work on it. And then more people adopt it, then it just kind of grows by itself. It's like spontaneous.
I feel like we've hit so many interesting things, which is like Arrow is largely kind of like behind the scenes, driving a lot of stuff. It's hard for that to surface. Like people might enjoy Arrow without even knowing it. And there's the question of like, how do you kind of support that kind of stuff? And then it's interesting to hear even like DuckDB, there's like the spec and people who might not just use Arrow, but maybe it might like rhyme with Arrow or they might keep Arrow in mind. And how do you kind of like write a good specification? One thing I thought I'd flag too is that I saw in a talk you gave before that Arrow has like thousands of issues open. Like there's tons of issues.
We came under 4,000 now with Nick Crane's help.
Yeah, incredible.
Are you using some AI tools to help with like grouping and summarization, linking, categorization, and things like that? I haven't dared to use I haven't yet for going through issues and like helping with like backlog, curation.
One thing Nick and I did was create a dashboard which surfaces, for example, issues that were not answered, issues that were opened by a new contributor, but because that's some things you want to kind of jump on first. Same for PRs and etc. So that's what we use, which I think it's useful because otherwise, what I tend to do is just answer things where I'm pinged because it's so much stuff going on. So
I mean, here's like I don't really mean this, but like how can I trust a project that has like 4,000 open issues? How do you think about that? Like
it's the closed issues, Hadley. Look how many closed issues there are. Yeah, that was probably like 20,000 closed issues.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, like how do you think? Because I think I've like evolved this like pretty unusual way of dealing with issues, just because I think fewer R users are comfortable on GitHub. So the number of issues you get for an R package is much, much smaller. So I like this, like the kind of inbox zero approach of issues. Like to me, the ideal number of issues in a repository is like under 25, because that's like one page on GitHub. But that's like, so like I just can't even imagine, like, how do you think about that? Like when you think about those 4,000 issues, like, you just don't care that there's all these open issues. Like, where's the, like, do you see them as being valuable or useful? What's the point? Like, I see the point of an issue is to be closed, I guess, but that's clearly not.
If you look at the issues as bug reports, then yes. But there's a lot of feature requests in Arrow. There's a lot of documentation, issues. There's user questions. I mean, it would be really nice to have zero, but I think it's important to understand the scope of Arrow. It's not one project that we normally think of. It's so broad. Just maybe to put it in perspective, we have in the repo, we have multiple languages, and every language is for a couple of projects, right? It's in Python, it's just one part, and you have C++, you have R, you have, I'm not really sure how many languages are still there, but because there's some of them are separate to make it easier. And then per language, you have so much parts of the implementation. You have, for example, in Python, in PyArrow, you have a part of the code base that deals with pandas compatibility. So you have issues for that. Then you have issues for file systems. And it's just such a broad thing that we're not stressing about it. We would like to have them all, not all closed, because there's always going to be something that will need to be done in Arrow, I think, because it's an evolving thing. It's not a project that it's just there and it will be used. It's more like it's developing. There's no new data types being included. There's some new things like Parquet. You have a specific code part where you deal with Parquet reading and writing. So Parquet is being evolved, and you have to match that. So I think you have to have a different mindset for Arrow project versus other packages.
I mean, the way I look at it is each language implementation of Arrow is aside from the ones that are a little more like wrapper layers like R and Python, but you can think of them as almost being like little operating system kernels for low level data operations. And so I mean, it's not exactly, as grandiose as like, oh, a Linux kernel for data like that. That would be a silly way to market it, but it's kind of true in a way. And I think like the set of like that toolbox is like that I think we always envision the project as like building on the specification, but like the specification alone is only so useful without like the toolbox and the framework of things that you need to build real world systems. And as time has gone on, I think that toolbox has grown, and sometimes it's expanded in ways where we've been like, oh, maybe that was a mistake to like take on that piece, and like we've pruned. I think the project has pruned things that were like not getting maintained, or that there just wasn't that much community interest in continuing to keep around, or maybe spinning off into a side project. But it's been a little bit of like, I think Neil, we had an Arrow summit in Paris at PyData Paris, and I think Neil Richardson described Arrow as a bit of a radical social experiment, and so I do feel that way, and some of that, like the anarchy of like the sprawling federated nature of the project has been, certainly makes things more complicated, but also I think has helped keep the community together and keep it thriving and productive.
Alenka, I mean, it seems like you've really latched onto Arrow as a contributor and done so much for the ecosystem and open source. I'm really curious, like what do you think are like the ingredients to really get started with something like that? Like, how does someone like get a foot into contributing and succeed at doing that kind of thing?
I think to get started, you have to, I don't know what would be the motivation. I think everybody has a different reason. But I think more I think of it, the more I talk to people, it's mainly experience, or to grow, or to learn, or to just, interact with, a new community. I think mainly that is that. I mean, there's for sure a lot of contributors, especially in Arrow, where they use the tool and they need some feature or some bug fixed, which is so awesome in open source that you can actually have the possibility to do that. It's not like I'm waiting for somebody to fix my problem. It's like you have the option to do that, and not just for you, but for somebody else for sure. So how to succeed? I think. Well, I'm not sure if I would succeed without people around me that helped. I mean, I did had to do the work and do the research and just stick with it, but just building Arrow from source locally, it's not an easy thing to do. And if I wouldn't have somebody helping me, it's quite possible that I wouldn't continue. So having this group and just having, people encourage you I think it was my third or second contribution that I was already paying like, oh, are you interested in doing this too? And this means so much, because you're like, oh my God, they noticed me. It's in a project like this. It's amazing feeling. So small things like that, when somebody would think it's maybe even rude to ping people. It's not. It's like you show somebody that they're worth to collaborate with and to put some trust in them.
Yeah, I could see like if you get pinged, it really shows like just realizing that people appreciated it and like noticed it, like really makes it nice. And I wonder if related to, I saw you gave a keynote and I think you gave a keynote at
In
Pi Data Paris,
Paris, yeah.
which is
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah, it was fun.
And I saw one thing you talked about too was imposter syndrome, like how to sort of approach that as a person in open source. I'm curious your thoughts, like what would you say is kind of the takeaway for people experiencing imposter syndrome and looking to contribute in open source?
Yeah, one thing worth mentioning maybe is that you're not the only one feeling imposter syndrome. I think it's a really like a lot of people feel that. When I talk to people after the keynote, when I talk to people I work with, which I feel they are the most brilliant people I've ever met, and they are saying that, oh, I feel I don't understand. I feel I'm not capable. Uh, I would say a lot of people feel that, and how to overcome. Um, well, again, maybe I'm repeating myself, but having somebody you could talk to. I talked to Raul a lot, who's a Apache Arrow, our friend, a contributor, and a PMC member also. He's involved in the project a lot. I'm talking to Nick on regular basis, also a contributor. And we see that it's a common thing, which maybe it shouldn't be, but I guess I don't know if it's open source related or is just technology related or is that happens in general with people, because you're working with a lot of folks, you see what they do, you see there is something amazing, and you always kind of want to match. But I think the real thing you need to do is find something you like and you feel comfortable and you feel motivated to do, and you feel you have fun, and then after a while you have to look back at what all of the things you did, not just like looking and comparing to others, but saying to yourself, and maybe having a friend so you can talk to, and they will say, look, this is amazing what you did. And that's also something I experience in Arrow, is people stop, they talk to you, and they say, Alenka, this is amazing work you did. And it really kind of, all the bad emotions you feel, they tend to go away. Yeah, I don't know, I was really intrigued by Dr. Kat Hicks. She was doing keynote in Posit at Posit conference, so that was a lot of kind of research I did there for my keynote. I wasn't talking a lot about imposter syndrome. I was just mentioning it and mentioning that we need to talk about it and do some research, because I think it's really important for us to talk about that. And yeah, Dr. Kat Hicks has a lot of good ideas on how to tackle that. So one thing I want to mention before I stop with this part is that at the Arrow community now, we're talking about, I'm still reading about what they're researching, and we're talking about what could we do as a process in the community that would help kind of remove these feelings. So one thing we are trying to do now is to make a blog post of highlighting contributions, saying, okay, this was a new contributor and they did amazing, or this is such an amazing job done by somebody. I think that would help. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things we've, like when we do the release announcements for tidyverse packages, we do just like a roundup, like, very kind of low effort, but we're at least like, hey, thanks. So like all of these people who have interacted with us on GitHub, and even like, we hear every now and then people are like, oh, that was really cool to like see my name, or like when people have done like pull requests for the Alpha Data Science book, like they get mentioned in the intro, like that. It's small, and obviously you can do much more, but even like little gestures like that, I think people appreciate being recognized and acknowledged.
Very much. And maybe also we don't all have to be, Hadley and Wes, it's fine if you're not the core developer. It's fine if you don't feel comfortable in doing something, but you feel comfortable in doing something else. I think we have to realize that we don't have to know everything. And then you start learning, and then if you have fun, you kind of see that you actually know a lot.
Yeah, it seems really neat, like acknowledging contributors and also like emphasizing to people like you don't have to be the best, like figure out what about this you like, and like why is this fun or interesting to you.
It is interesting. Like, I think like when you teach a workshop or you TA a workshop, and like even if you're like, oh, like you feel like often like if you're TAing your first workshop, you feel kind of insecure in your knowledge. But then you realize like when you go and help people, like the people taking the workshop kind of like know like literally nothing, and you like that, it's so like reinforcing to you, like how valuable.
Yeah, it shows how much you grown and how much you learned actually.
Yeah, and I kind of experienced this afresh recently. Like I taught my first yoga class. Like I subbed for my teacher, and she like prepared the class. I just like gave it. But one thing that I found fascinating was like I've always been like, how does a yoga teacher know how to do adjustments? Like how do they know like to like, oh, this. And I just kind of thought, oh, that like, and obviously some of it is like years of experience and knowledge of anatomy and training, but some of it is also you just look at people from outside their body, and you're like, oh my god, that looks like you're so wonky and off, like, and just having that like, oh, actually, this is not like it's not as complicated as I thought it was. It's such like an empowering experience to be like, okay, like just being outside of a person can be like real, having that fresh perspective. You don't have to be that much more knowledgeable than them to be like helpful and useful and to make their journey a little nicer.
It's an interesting thought where like if you're the person doing yoga, you might have the thought like, how did the teacher know to adjust me? But once you're the teacher, you're like, well, I'm seeing like 20 people
and it stands out.
Like,
yeah,
stands
yeah.
out.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. I'm trying to think. Oh, this is our chance to turn this into a podcast solely about yoga.
Yoga. Yes.
But one interesting thing we could maybe turn to the group is, I know you mentioned a couple questions that might be interesting to ask folks here.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe this is kind of related to like yoga and learning. I think one thing you mentioned is like, for learning, do people prefer to like learn as you go, or to like stop and take a course to focus on things? Did I get that question right?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, I'd be curious folks' take on that. Like, do you think it's better to, like, when you want to learn something, do you prefer to stop and take a course, or kind of like learn as you go?
I teach a lot of workshops, but I have to say, like, I hate taking workshops myself because, like, the pace is set by someone else. Like, first of all, like, now I'm like so used to watching like videos on YouTube at like 1.5 or 2x speed. I'm like, why is this person talking so slowly? This is so inefficient. And then that like a bit of an ability to like kind of like go off on your own little learning tangent. So in some ways, like classes like feel like so, I don't know, like, yeah, like I don't enjoy them. But on the other hand, like I take yoga classes, and that is something where I'm like, okay, it's also nice just to be like told what to do every now and then, and just here is a path. Like I don't have to like forge my own path. I'm just going to follow someone else's path. And that is like really nice sometimes too.
Yeah, for me, like I definitely prefer hands-on learning where possible. And so whenever I dive into something new, I will try to learn just enough to, be able to start doing, and then try to create a virtuous cycle of like doing and then running into the things that I don't know how to do and trying to figure it out, and then, kind of looping until over the course of time, I guess that develops mastery. turns out that when it comes to programming, it turns out that that's all being broken apart and destroyed maybe forever right now. But just kind of interesting. But coding used to be the perfect example of like the hands-on ultimate in hands-on learning. Like you learn how to do hello world, and then you learn how to learn how to assign variables and write a loop and then write a function, and then you learn how to think about organizing groups of functions and modules and thinking about object-oriented programming and state management and multi-threading and distributed systems and data storage and file systems. And all that is not to hijack the topic, but it's I feel like the whole subject of the whole domain of learning is like being turned on its head right now. And so it's it a part of me is like, the quaint old days of reading a book and learning how to do things that way. Like I'm actually ideating like what the fourth edition of Python for data analysis looks like. And part of me is like, do people even still read this book? And like, I look at the book sales, and like the book sales have dropped substantially because people aren't buying programming books as much anymore. And you know why? So, I think as like book authors or like people creating learning materials, tutorials, like it's a whole new world. And I feel like the whole domain of pedagogy is going to have to remake itself in order to remain relevant and to keep up with the way that things are changing. Otherwise, like, why would people go to a class or read a book when they can sit with their chatbot and self-tutor, at their and explore topics, of their own choosing in whatever order they wish. So, because all the chatbots have already ingested all of our books, and so.
The other interesting connection, I think, is like on the whole, I'm still like optimistic about like software engineering as a career. Like I think, software engineers are still valuable. And at least right now, it feels like AI is kind of a force multiplier. But we are also at this sort of interesting like point where you're like, well, like there's also like, being a yoga teacher, like AI is not going to take that over anytime soon. Like that, it's just sort of an interesting where you're like, well, it's kind of nice to have that like in your, your back pocket, like these things that are like so specifically human, where that like human connection is so important. Like that, those sort of careers feel a lot like, safer than software engineering right now.
That's true. But I think still for, really diving into a harder subject that's not documented yet, you still need to have people that are intrigued by discovery and learning. So I don't think it's gonna, but for general programming, I would say, it's a strange time.
Yeah, certainly developers of, data entry CRUD applications are, I think the first on the chopping block. I actually think I think in a talk that I gave recently and then maybe in another podcast, like I described the Arrow project as being, I felt like an AI resistant project or AI resistant technology. And I wanted to see what you thought about that, both in the sense that like, like AI doesn't make Arrow irrelevant. In some ways, it makes it even more important, like as a grand unifier. But also like you think about 10 years of development on this project, and I'm using coding agents, every day to build little applications to make my life a little more streamlined, a little more productive. And even seeing like how difficult it is to guide chatbots to create correct and useful software requires so much human in the loop attention and intervention and guidance and review and feedback. There's this whole narrative around, artificial general intelligence and super intelligence, but like personally, I don't buy it. Like, cause I'm using these agents every day and like, I'm like, yeah, the more you're using these things, like, yes, they're tremendously useful. Like I'm building more software, more productive than I ever have been in my life, which is, insane. But at the same time, the human element of like the judgment feels more essential than ever. And so I'm curious how much you thought about that and how you were seeing that play out in the Arrow ecosystem.
Yeah. I mean, you could use agents to help you. When you need to debug something in Arrow, it can be quite complicated to find what's wrong. So there's some help there that I use, especially since Paris, when me and Wes talked, and I was like, oh, Claude sounds really cool. So I'm actually a late user.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, but you need to have agents there for when you get stuck, or for repetitive things. Like, for example, now there's a lot of documentation in Arrow, especially in Python, and we have IPython code blocks, somewhere Python code blocks. So it's kind of a mixture because different people contribute, and this is a perfect thing for an agent, because it's you just need to unify it and do that for me. But yeah, doing some real work or even usage of Arrow, I think you still need you need to depend on yourself there and just do some digging and research. I actually started using agents more when I started doing the data engineering or work that's not related to Arrow. It's totally on the other side, which is having to ingest a lot of data from different sources and using so many tools I never used before. This is a local telco company that I help. And I was a R user, a Python user. So when I started to work with them, they were like, okay, which tools do you use? And I'm like, Python. And they're like, okay, we use Kafka, Airflow, Meltano, DBT, Snowflake. I mean, it's so many tools, and there I really had a lot of help from the agents, just to see, okay, what's the structure, what's the syntax that this tool uses or that one, and it really saved me a lot of time.
Yeah, coming back to Wes's point about pedagogy, like I think one of the things that's really interesting, like it feels like now if you know how to program in one language, that skill is like so transferable to other languages, because you're not kind of constantly stuck in this like, oh, how do I write a for loop? But like, how are people going to get to that? Like, how do you become a competent programmer, like a really good programmer, when for like the first maybe 2 or 3 years of your career, like a chatbot's going to do everything better than you?
When I was in college and we were learned to program, what I heard a lot was that mathematicians are good programmers, because the way you need to think as a programmer is easier because of the way you have to think in mathematics to solve problems. So, what do you think about this? This idea of you still need to have the mindset to program well. It's not just practice. You need to think in a different way. So that still needs to be learned, right?
I guess the kind of the way I look at it is I think the field of software engineering is, essentially maybe go at like the difference between, before the printing press or like before books. Or I'm trying to come up with the right analogy, right? So like plenty of people, they read books, they read literature, they go to school to study literature, they do analysis of writing, and they can understand what good writing looks like. And there's whole fields of liberal arts, scholars that study and scrutinize and learn about, what constitutes good literature. And so I think the field of software engineering is going to go from, essentially like the agent is doing all of the typing, but you're still doing all of most of the critical thinking about like what is the proper shape and structure of the system, essentially creating like the algebraic structure of like the layers that you're building. And I do think that new tools will emerge to help visualize and orchestrate like the different layers of the system that need to be like compartmentalized in such a way that, like, I think the problem right now with agents is that they create code bases that are so entangled that the agent starts like getting confused about all of the like commingled responsibilities and things. And so I'm hopeful that some new, software engineering practices emerge that enable like kind of that more, to your point, like to that more mathematical mindset of like, I was also a mathematician. And so I approached software engineering from like a very mathematician centric viewpoint of like thinking about things in terms of like stacks of lemmas and theorems and trying to prove things by layering things on top of each other. And I think maybe that drove the part of what was so intellectually appealing about Arrow, and maybe since you're a mathematician, maybe something that appealed to you is that notion of composability and like the interoperability and like the layering of software, almost as a mathematical concept in a way. And so I found the idea of really intellectually appealing in a sense. And I find that not to stereotype, but I do find that a lot of folks who have computer science degrees often approach software engineering from a more like pragmatic mindset and less of like a theoretical or like design, like kind of design perspective. Not to say that in general, but like if you took like a room full of 100 mathematicians turned software engineers and 100 computer science degrees turned software engineers, I do think that like different thought patterns would emerge in terms of like, the inherent approach to building software. Of course, I'd be interested in like actually doing some studies and learning more about that. This is just kind of my anecdotal experience, which is, probably BS. So feel free, if you're listening, feel free to call BS. So it's just my gut feeling.
Your comment about literature that reminded me, I should try and find this again, but a few years ago I read this, I don't know if it was a proposal or an actual thing, but it was an MFA, a Master's in Fine Arts in like programming or software engineering, like attacking it from like the one of the ways you learn how to do painting is you go and like look at the great works of the past and you like recreate them. And just that, like, it does feel like that we've also got a lot we can learn from the humanities instead in terms of now like studying and thinking about these volumes of text we're producing.
I mean truly, like we can begin to like think and actually dedicate energy to like the aesthetic qualities of a code base. And that used to be like the stuff of like oh, you're wasting time beautifying the code base. But when beautifying the code base has 1/1000th of the cost that it used to have, of course the code base should be beautiful. Of course it should be well structured, and easy to reason about. So I think I'm optimistic. I think that that maybe the field of software engineering will shrink, but I think maybe it will stay the same size and we'll all be building 10 to 100 times more software. I think that's the more, that's my hope actually, is that, we're building a lot more, like we're building the software tools that would never have been justifiable to build in the past, like personalized, like apps that only serve 100 people or less, like, really hyper specialized tools that they deliver incredible value to small groups of people. And in the past, like maybe it would cost $1 million to build that tool or that product. And so you think about like, well, there's 100 people. So of course, we're not going to spend $10,000 a person to build that thing. But if you can build the same thing now in a week or two, and a $200 Claude Max plan, of course, somebody has to babysit the agent and their time is not free. So you could back out the cost, but maybe the cost of like a $1 million bespoke software product now requires like, somebody who's an expert in agentic programming in 2 weeks of time. And maybe you pay them, $5,000 or $10,000 for that service. And so clearly like, there's a market and a need for expertise in using these tools. But I think the result is, I expect the number of unique shipped software products to be products to be a minimum an order of magnitude what it was in the past, if not 2 orders of magnitude. And if I look at my personal sphere of the software that I'm creating for myself, I'm building all kinds of stuff that I would have never been able to build in the past, just stuff that I would sit and think about on vacation and like, wouldn't it be nice if I had a thing to do this thing in my life that, oh, but I couldn't possibly take time away from maintaining Arrow. So
the other place I've found like interesting is like the cost, also like the cost of refactoring, the cost of writing tests, the cost of like improving the quality of code has gone down as well. So maybe like we get an order of magnitude more software, or maybe we get software that's like an order of magnitude like higher quality. So it's, I don't know, it's definitely like interesting times to be a software engineer for many reasons.
it does remind me too of Wes's point about beautification, that I feel like a lot of the designs I had, it wasn't like I thought it was the most beautiful, or like 2 years on, I might even have arrived at a better way, but not have wanted to go back and change it. But it is crazy to see today you can be like refactor into this new setup and almost just know within like 5 or 10 minutes, like, does this feel better? Which is really kind of mind blowing to me.
Yeah, I also remember like in the past there'd be those kind of refactorings where it felt like as you got further and further into the swamp, you're like, oh, like should I just give up? But I've been like working on this for 3 days, so I'm gonna just like push on through. And now you're like, oh well, Claude just spent an hour on that. Like screw it. Like I don't like where it went. I'll just throw it all away. Yeah.
Yeah, for real. And I think to Wes's point about small apps too, I really had a kind of mind blowing experience recently where I study Cantonese a little bit, which is not, it's really hard to get written resources for Cantonese because it's only spoken, not really written. So like 7, 8 years ago, I would pay people through Upwork to transcribe materials. And it's crazy to think today I just use like Whisper and an LLM to then like clean it up. And yeah, like have an app that spun up so fast to help me like track this and read transcripts. And it did kind of blow my mind that I get to, as a person who's a cognitive psychologist, like now I get to almost decide to be a cognitive psychologist and leave the coding to like Claude Code. Like for this activity, I'm not even thinking about the code. And I think to Wes's point of like small, nice apps, it's kind of mind blowing to have that ability to not even come into it as a programmer, but to still get to like experience a new tool that like on vacation you thought like it'd be neat to like try this out. Yes, I'm super curious like what people end up building. Wes, I saw you had a tool for code review. That's pretty recent?
Yeah, just this week I built a little tool called RoboRev in Go, and I've never written a line of Go in my life. True story. So Claude, Claude helped me build it in Go, and the idea is that RoboRev it runs a background service, and the idea is that if there's a repo that you're working in with agents, you run RoboRev in it, and it will install a Git commit hook in the repository. And so whenever one of your agents, because you might have multiple agents working in the same repo in the same branch, which I know is like sounds crazy, but actually it's okay if you ask them to work on distinct things. But whenever one of the agents commits, immediately RoboRev will pick up the Git commit hook, will enqueue a review request, and you can choose the coding agent that you want to review that commit. And so basically it will kick off, Claude or Codex or Gemini or Copilot with a prompt that includes repo specific instructions. So maybe there's like, guidelines around like what you want reviewed and what you care about, what you don't care about. And then it includes, if the diff is small, it includes the diff inline, which is good. Otherwise, the LLM can hallucinate when it's inspecting the diffs with tool calls. But if the diffs are too big, then you just let it use tool calls to look at the commits, commit or commits. And then basically it has a terminal user interface. So basically you can have, like I work with a stack of terminals in Kitty Terminal and macOS. So I'll have like 4 or 5 terminals stacked on top of each other. And so I've got like my RoboRev terminal queue of reviews, and then my agents that are working. And so basically an agent commits, the review triggers, it takes 2 to 4 minutes to run. I read the review, and then I copy paste the review back into the agent that wrote the commit, and I'm like, fix this, and it fixes it. And so that's pretty cool. So check it out. Speaking of like the transcription thing, another thing I did over the holidays, I always wanted to have transcripts and like basically just like descriptions about talks that I've given in the past. So I used Claude to transcribe every talk that I've ever given that has a video online, and generate a transcript and generate like a 500-word summary, 500 words or less of the talk. And it did it. Use Whisper to transcribe, and then use Claude to summarize. And yeah, that's all on my website now, which is yeah, it's mostly for me, but I found it very satisfying. And it's like one of those things where I could never have justified the expense or the time to do that in the past. And now it's done. And I actually had a podcast that I recorded that was released this morning, and I, fired up the agent. I said, here's the YouTube link of this podcast that I did, transcribe it, summarize it according to my preferences, which are in the claw.md file, and push it to my website. I reviewed it first and I pushed it manually, but get it ready to push. And it took about 5 minutes, and voila, it was done. So pretty cool stuff.
It's freaky. Well, Alenka, I know you had a question about learning, and we went into a deep, optimistic doom spiral on AI, but that may be relevant for programmers thinking about the pedagogy and why we program and how. I know we're getting up to time, but I'd be really curious, maybe like closing out. I know you mentioned you spent like a few years teaching yoga before getting into Arrow and open source. I wonder if, almost closing out, do you have any any insights coming from sort of your practice teaching yoga, that any like inspiration you've taken for contributing to open source?
I think what I took from Arrow to maybe not really yoga classes or instructions per se, but more of collaboration, which is kind of funny. I think Arrow really taught me how to collaborate also in the yogic space, because in Slovenia we have a association of Iyengar Yoga Association, and I think it's teaching me a lot about how to work with people, because I don't think we are doing that well in the association. And the other way around, it's a really hard question, because yoga teaches you so much, and I think it's just anything I do in Arrow, or going on a keynote, and everything's connected in my opinion to what I do on the mat in the morning. But mostly I would say what yoga teaches you, if you really want to get into it, it teaches you how to not give up. Because one thing is to go to classes, as Hadley said. It's really nice because you go there and people tell you what to do, and you still need to work a bit, but it's easier. But then progressing into making your own practice regularly, it takes effort, it takes discipline. So that kind of teaches you how to work in open source, not to jump really fast and then move away and be here and there, but kind of progress slowly, look back what you did, how much you learn. I think that would be the first idea that comes to my mind.
Like, if you're looking to contribute, you're not an imposter, and maybe rather than opening an issue, you could hit a yoga mat first to build the skills. Alenka, thanks so much for coming on, and for all your work on these like undergirding systems that like quietly keep so much of what we do afloat. It's been I feel like so nice to hear about like how you can contribute to open source, and everything that goes into it. So really glad to have you on, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, for inviting me. Thanks
Thanks for being here.
See ya.